It is a Tuesday morning in Paris. The year is 1721. The Place de Grève, the great public square in front of the city hall, is packed with thousands of people. Men, women, children, merchants who have closed their shops, noblemen who have come in their carriages, priests who have come to pray. They are all here for the same reason. They are here to watch a man be broken alive. His name is Louis Dominique Cartouche, the most notorious criminal in France, the leader of a gang that terrorized Paris for years, a man whose name has become a legend in the streets of the city. He is 28 years old. He is strapped to a wooden cross lying flat on the cobblestones. His arms and legs are spread wide, tied to the wood. The executioner raises an iron bar above his right leg. And then the crowd goes silent. What most people watching that day did not know, what Cartouche himself may have been counting on, was that he had been granted what French law called the retentum, a secret instruction from the judge to the executioner, specifying the precise moment at which the prisoner should be quietly strangled to end their suffering before the very worst arrived. It was considered a mercy, reserved for those whose crimes, though terrible, did not warrant the absolute maximum the law could provide. For the worst criminals in France, the regicides, the mass murderers, the men who had committed crimes so heinous, the judges felt compelled to withhold every shred of compassion. There was no retentum. They were left on the wheel until nature finished what the iron bar had started. Cartouche was not in that category. He was a thief and a murderer, but he was not the worst France had ever produced. This is the story of the breaking wheel, the most terrifying, most theatrical, and most meticulously documented execution method in the history of France. To understand the breaking wheel, you have to understand what justice meant in medieval and early modern France. It is not what it means today. Today, justice is about punishment proportional to the crime, about rehabilitation, about protecting the rights of the accused, about keeping suffering private, behind prison walls, away from public view. In France, between the 16th and 18th centuries, justice meant something completely different. It meant spectacle. The French state, the monarchy, the courts, the church, understood something that modern democracies have largely forgotten, that public fear is the most powerful tool of social control ever invented, and that nothing generates public fear quite like a public execution that takes an entire day. The breaking wheel was not designed simply to kill. Death was almost incidental. The breaking wheel was designed to make an example, to break a human body so completely, so publicly, so slowly, that everyone who watched would spend the rest of their lives making absolutely certain they never ended up on one. The procedure was precise, documented in legal codes, carried out by professional executioners who had trained for years to do it correctly. Here is exactly how it worked. The condemned prisoner was brought to the public square under heavy guard. A large crowd had always gathered. Executions were announced in advance, and attendance was essentially a civic event. Vendors sold food. Parents brought children. The prisoner was first stripped to the waist and tied spread eagle to a large wooden cross lying flat on the ground, called the St. Andrew's Cross. The wood had notches cut into it at precise intervals, positioned directly under the prisoner's arms, legs, and chest. The executioner, accompanied by his assistants, then took an iron bar, roughly the weight and size of a large hammer, and began to work. He started with the limbs. Each stroke was precise, aimed at the notched sections of the cross. The notches ensured that when the iron bar struck the flesh and bone above, the bone had nowhere to go. It simply shattered. First the right leg, then the left, then the right arm, then the left. Then, with a single massive blow to the chest, the rib cage. The entire process could last anywhere from a few minutes to over an hour, depending on the executioner's pace and the instructions of the court. Because the court had the power to specify exactly how many blows were to be delivered, in what order, and at what speed. Some condemned men received 8 blows, some received 12, some received more. And here is the detail that separates the breaking wheel from simple execution. After the bones were broken, the prisoner was still alive. The executioner then took the prisoner's body, shattered, dislocated, bent at impossible angles, and wove it through the spokes of a large cartwheel mounted on a post. Arms through one set of spokes, legs through another, the body twisted around the wheel like a rag doll. And then the wheel was raised, high enough for the entire crowd to see. And there the prisoner remained, alive, conscious, exposed to the sun, the wind, the rain, unable to move, unable to die quickly. The broken bones made breathing agonizing. The exposure brought flies and birds. The dehydration was slow and total. Death on the wheel could take hours. In some documented cases, days. The French judiciary had a term for this final phase. They called it the retentum, a Latin word meaning the retained part. The retentum was a secret instruction given to the executioner by the judge, specifying at what point during the procedure the prisoner should be quietly strangled, to spare them the longest part of the suffering. The retentum was granted as an act of mercy. For the worst criminals, those whose crimes the court considered most heinous, the retentum was withheld entirely. They were left on the wheel until nature finished what the iron bar had started. Now we come to the names, because the breaking wheel was not an abstract legal procedure. It was applied to real people, people whose stories are documented in French court records, in newspapers, in the writings of philosophers who watched in horror. Louis Dominique Cartouche, whom we met at the beginning of the story, was broken on the wheel in Paris on November 28, 1721. He was the leader of a gang of several hundred criminals who had operated across Paris for years, committing robberies, burglaries, and murders. His execution drew the largest crowd the Place de Grève had seen in years. Contemporary accounts describe the crowd cheering when the iron bar first fell. But here is the detail about Cartouche that history books rarely mention. During the months of his imprisonment, the royal authorities subjected him to extensive torture to extract the names of his accomplices. Cartouche said nothing. He stayed silent through everything they did to him. It was not torture that finally broke him. It was betrayal. Standing on the scaffold, looking out at the enormous crowd, Cartouche realized something. His gang, the hundreds of men who had sworn oaths of loyalty to him, who had fought beside him, who had promised to come to his rescue, had not come. Not one of them. What the worst extremities of torture could not procure from him, the compelling incentive of revenge instantly provided. Before his execution, Cartouche called aside his prosecutors and proceeded to name every single accomplice, every lover, every accessory. Over 350 people were subsequently arrested. Dozens were broken on the wheel themselves in the months that followed. One diarist recorded that summer, nothing but hangings and breakings on the wheel. Louis Mandrin, the most celebrated bandit in French history, a man who had smuggled contraband goods across France for years while evading royal troops, was broken on the wheel in Valence on May 26, 1755. Mandrin was so beloved by ordinary French people that riots broke out when he was captured. None of them prevented his execution. Guy Adair de la Fontenelle, a Breton nobleman condemned for high treason and extraordinary cruelty during the Wars of Religion, was broken alive in Paris in 1602. His case was notable because he was one of the rare noblemen subjected to the wheel, an execution usually reserved for commoners, since nobles were typically beheaded. But of all the cases in the history of the breaking wheel in France, none had more consequences. None changed France more profoundly than the case of Jean Calas. Jean Calas was a Protestant cloth merchant from Toulouse. He was 63 years old when he was arrested. He would be 64 when he died. On October 13, 1761, his son Marc-Antoine was found dead in the family shop, apparently hanged. The rumors spread immediately. Marc-Antoine had been about to convert to Catholicism. His Protestant father had killed him to prevent the conversion. Never mind that there was no evidence. Never mind that the family's accounts were consistent and never changed. Never mind that the most likely explanation, that Marc-Antoine, burdened by gambling debts and unable to complete his studies because of his Protestant faith, had taken his own life, was the one Jean Calas himself had initially suggested. The crowd had decided. Jean Calas was arrested, tried before the Toulouse Parliament, convicted on the basis of rumors, prejudice, and the anti-Protestant hysteria that still gripped southern France nearly 2 centuries after the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. Before he was taken to the wheel, Jean Calas was subjected to what French law called the question ordinaire and the question extraordinaire, judicial torture designed to extract a confession that would implicate his wife and his surviving son as well. 17 liters of water were poured down his throat in a procedure that replicated the sensation of drowning, pitcher after pitcher, until his lungs burned and his body convulsed. His arms and legs were stretched until the joints separated. They warned him his pain would be redoubled if he did not confess. They were right about that. Through all of it, every pitcher of water, every degree of stretching, Jean Calas said the same thing. I am innocent. I did not kill my son. On March 10, 1762, Jean Calas, an innocent man, was broken on the wheel at the Place Saint-Georges in Toulouse. He was 64 years old. He maintained his innocence through every blow of the iron bar. He died on the wheel, still insisting he had not killed his son. His case reached the ears of a man named Voltaire. Voltaire, the greatest philosopher of the French Enlightenment, the most famous writer in Europe, a man whose pen was more powerful than most armies, became consumed by the Calas case. He spent 3 years investigating, writing, campaigning. His pamphlet, Treatise on Tolerance, published in 1763, used the Calas case to demolish the foundations of judicial torture and religious persecution in France. 3 years after Jean Calas was broken on the wheel, the Toulouse Parliament reversed its verdict. Calas was officially declared innocent in 1765. His family received compensation from the royal treasury. The innocent man was dead. But his case had started something that could not be stopped. Here is the twist that changes everything. The breaking wheel did not end because France became more compassionate. It did not end because the courts decided that breaking a human body in a public square was incompatible with civilized society. It ended because of philosophy. The Calas case, and dozens like it, gave Voltaire and his contemporaries the ammunition they needed to attack the entire French judicial system. The Enlightenment had been building its case for decades. Now it had its martyr. The arguments were powerful and simple. Torture produces false confessions, not truth. Public execution brutalizes the population rather than deterring crime. A justice system that breaks innocent men on wheels is not a justice system at all. It is state-sponsored theater of cruelty. The last recorded execution by the breaking wheel in France took place on September 4, 1790, 1 year after the French Revolution had begun. A soldier named André Sauret, convicted for his role in a military mutiny in Nancy, was the last man broken on the wheel on French soil. He died on the wheel in a France that was already debating the guillotine, a machine explicitly designed to make execution swift, painless, and equal for all, regardless of class or crime. The wheel and the guillotine represent 2 completely opposite philosophies of justice. One says that justice must be seen to be painful, that the spectacle of suffering is itself the punishment, and that the crowd's reaction is part of the sentence. The other says that death is death, that the state has no business prolonging or displaying suffering, and that every condemned person, regardless of their crime, deserves to die in the same way. France chose the guillotine, and the wheel became a relic of a world that the revolution was determined to destroy. But here is what never changes. Jean Calas, the innocent cloth merchant from Toulouse, broken on the wheel because of rumors and religious hatred, lies in an unmarked grave. Voltaire's treatise on tolerance is still in print. And in the Place du Capitole in Toulouse, where Jean Calas was executed, there is today a plaque. It reads, simply, "To the memory of Jean Calas, victim of fanaticism." The wheel is gone. The fanaticism, Voltaire would probably note, is something we are still working on. If this video moved you, leave a comment below. Do you think the Calas case could happen today? An innocent person destroyed by public hysteria and institutional prejudice. Subscribe for more French history, the stories they never taught you in school.